I am your host, Robert Rowe, and you are listening to Awake Radio.
Listeners, and welcome to the show. Today is May 10th, 2013. Watertown, Massachusetts, a city mired in shame and scandal, a city put down by the forces of evil, and a city unwilling to get back up on their feet again. A city that should feel so ashamed of itself right now that they should just shut themselves in their houses and remain there, never coming outside again. And now you're thinking, but Robert, you communist bastard, why would you place such shame on that traumatized city? Why? Why? Because it's an entire city of bitches. And I'm using that term in the correct manner, not the vulgar way. They rolled over and exposed their necks like a bitch to her alpha. They have forgotten that they are the alphas and the government is their bitch. In fact, it seems that most of America has forgotten this concept. And to make matters worse, they are lauding the police forces as heroes. And for what? For detaining a man who was about 2 minutes from death and incapable of defending himself. They're making the police out to be heroes for doing nothing more than mopping up a mess left behind by someone else. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong. I have a lot of respect for law enforcement. Any man or woman who can wake up each and every day knowing that the very nature of their job means that it could be their last day on earth and still have the chutzpah to put on that badge and walk out their front door and do that job has my respect. To be sure, there are plenty of reasons to dislike and distrust the police. Police corruption and abuse of authority is really starting to run rampant in this country. And it's a problem we must address and do so from a position of strength. I'm going to tell you a little personal story. I have an uncle whom I respect tremendously. My uncle started out as a beat cop in his city, and he rose through the ranks and eventually became the chief of police. He is a good and honorable man, and I am confident that under his watch, the police force in his city always maintained the highest degree of professionalism and respect for their population. Unfortunately, he's retired now, and I fear for the future of that city. The current chief of police in that city doesn't necessarily share the strict moral compass that my uncle uses every day. Now, I've not had the opportunity to ask my uncle his opinion on what happened in Watertown. Quite frankly, we don't run in the same social circles. Let's just suffice it to say that in my family, I am the blackest of the black sheep. And out of respect for him, his family, and their social standing in their community, I keep my distance. Because, quite frankly, they don't need to be associated with the likes of me. I believe that if this event had happened, though, in my uncle's town during his watch, the civil rights of the citizens would not have been violated as they were in Watertown. I believe he could have accomplished the same results without having to resort to such unconstitutional activities. This is because, in the end, my uncle is a good man and a good cop. But he lives on the West Coast. On the West Coast, people have a different perspective on life than people on the East Coast. Life in the West is a bit more laid back and people are a bit more respectful. It goes without saying that the state of California is not included in these statements. California is, in my opinion, just as corrupt a state as any of these East Coast states. So, like many who live out west, I pretend that California doesn't exist. I mean, it's bad enough that we have to accept Idaho. Including California would seriously test the limits of my sanity, which many already say is questionable. Alright, so what does all this have to do with Watertown? Well, I just want you to understand that I don't hold any sort of grudge against law enforcement. They are necessary, and I personally believe that most cops are good people. Yes, it cannot be denied that there are bad cops. It also cannot be denied that even good cops will sometimes do bad things. But overall, I believe most cops to be good and genuinely believe that what they are doing is just and honorable. Now let's look at the example of why I say that some cops are bad cops. Watertown is the best example of abuse of police power we have had since before the Revolutionary War in 1775. Now think about that, because there have been plenty of examples of police abuse of authority since then. But this is the biggest one since the founding of our country, more than 230 years. The police and other law enforcement personnel in Watertown, including, shamefully, the National Guard, went door to door, conducting warrantless searches of the houses. Now, to be fair to the officers, I don't think any of them thought they were breaking the laws. I don't think any of them thought they were acting outside of their authority. I believe that what happened is that they allowed a singular focus to get carried away. In their minds, they needed to find that suspect and find him quickly. Unfortunately, even after kicking in every door in the city and ransacking every house and every apartment, they failed in their mission. They never found their suspect. What they did do was leave every citizen in the city traumatized by their actions. I know what you're thinking. But Robert, you pig-headed and narrow-minded ass! It wasn't the police who traumatized the citizens, it was the bombers. No, it wasn't! Do you really think that the citizens of Watertown have never experienced a crime in their city? Do you really think that Watertown had never had a police-involved shooting prior to this event? Do you really believe that there was never a police chase through the streets of Watertown before this? Seriously? What traumatized the citizenry of Watertown was having their doors kicked in and armed men dressed in black body armor ransacked their houses while they had guns pointed at their heads. The suspect was not found in any house in that town, which brings up my next thought. After searching every single house in the town and not finding the suspect, the shelter-in-place order, aka martial law, was lifted. And it was only then, when the people of the town were released from their involuntary imprisonment, that the suspect was found. It was a citizen who found the suspect, not law enforcement. Once the suspect was found, half dead and incapable of defending himself from previously inflicted wounds, he was eventually approached by the officers and taken into custody. He was then taken to a local hospital for treatment of those wounds. And what happened next? What was the supremely shameful and disgraceful act that happened next? The citizens of Watertown applauded the law enforcement for their failure. They formed lines along either side of the road, and as each police vehicle, each FBI vehicle, each SWAT truck, and what have you, went by, they applauded Nobody applauded the real hero of the story, the citizen who actually found the suspect. No, the private citizen who actually brought about the end of this event received no applause or adulation. Nobody recognized this person's role in the event. Nope. Instead, the bitches of Watertown applauded those who violated their civil rights and failed to do their job. Watertown, you need to rename your city Bitchville. Your city slogan should be, "We roll over like the bitches we are." Now, I'm not upset that they didn't resist the door-to-door searches. That's not why I'm angry with Watertown. Because I'll be honest with you, if armed men come to my door and put a gun to my head and the heads of my family, I'm going to comply with their wishes. And I bet you would too. And the people of Watertown were correct to do so, in my opinion. But one thing is certain. As soon as you're done, I am coming after your ass. And the people of Watertown have a very solid case. By the very next day, every attorney's office in that town should have been inundated with calls by citizens demanding that they file a lawsuit against the government for civil liberty violations. Each and every citizen should be so outraged that there should be thousands of suits filed in the courts already. There should not be one person in that city who has not filed a suit. So by now you're probably thinking, "You right-wing radical fanatic, Robert, there is an emergency exception law that allows them to temporarily suspend your rights and conduct warrantless searches." Really? To that I have one response. If there were a law that allowed the police to suspend your right of due process temporarily, pull you out into the street, and shoot you in the head, would you support it? Would you obey it? Of course you wouldn't. The law is completely wrong. Just as temporarily suspending your right to freedom from warrantless searches is wrong! But let's just for a moment pretend that it isn't wrong. Let's pretend that this is just a law, and it's a good law. It was still misapplied. This was not an emergency situation. If the Chinese army were occupying the homes of those American citizens, that is an emergency situation. In that situation, please suspend my rights and kill those commie bastards. If you have to kill me to get to them, then feel free to do so. That's acceptable. I don't mind you violating my rights in that case. But this was not an acceptable reason. This was a violation, plain and simple. If this event were sufficient enough to use the emergency exception, then every time the police are chasing a suspect and they lose him, they will be able to use this emergency exception. That is the precedent that has been set here. Speaking of precedents, let's look at what happened days after the Watertown lockdown. Police in Oakland, California were so emboldened by the lack of outrage in Watertown, they decided to use the same tactic to conduct an illegal raid. They blocked off a portion of the city and searched door to door without a warrant to confiscate guns that were lawfully owned. Yes, this happened. In the United States, people. Yet there was very little coverage of the event by the shamestream media. And the excuse that was given by law enforcement to conduct the raids, they were looking for guns that were illegally owned or in the possession of those deemed mentally or emotionally compromised. Nobody was given a hearing by a competent court to determine whether or not they were mentally or emotionally compromised. No, the police were just given a piece of paper with a list of names on it and told to go round up the guns. Again, there was no resistance. Again, no lawsuits filed. Again, a little liberty was lost. And again, no added safety gained. Now, you probably understand my previous comments about California. I mean, it's really one messed up state. No wonder people are running out of there in droves. I would not put it past the state lawmakers to pass a law saying that once you're in California, you can never leave, just to stop the outflow of population. The emergency exception is unconstitutional and therefore unlawful. If the government wants to add an emergency exception law to add a level of additional safety, they are going to need to propose a constitutional amendment. It is acceptable to do this if the government feels they need to protect the people, which, by the way, is not their job. Then they need to ask permission from the people first. There is a procedure for doing this. The Constitution allows for this to happen if the people want it, but only if the people want it to happen. The government is not allowed, under any circumstances, to provide for the protection of the people outside of their responsibilities outlined in the Constitution. This means that laws like the NDAA and the Patriot Act are not legal because they are outside of the limits allowed by the Constitution. It is okay for the loyal servant to want to protect his master. I'm okay with the servant asking permission of the master to increase the level of protection he provides for his master. That shows the appropriate respect for the master from the servant, and it puts the decision in the hands of the master where it belongs. The master decides what level of protection is acceptable to him and what level is not. Right now, the level of protection we are receiving from our servant class is unacceptable. They are trying to protect us from enemies that oftentimes don't exist, enemies that are imagined. They are forcing protection on us that we don't want. And as Watertown clearly demonstrated, they really aren't that good at it either. So why are the masters of this country allowing their incompetent servant to provide protection that's unwanted and quite honestly unnecessary? Because the master has become fat and lazy. The master has given the servant increasingly greater responsibilities that are outside of the skill set of the servant. Politicians do not have the intelligence or skill necessary to provide protection to the American people. We have generals and admirals to do this. Politicians are not intelligent or skilled enough to provide jobs for the people. We have entrepreneurs to do this. Politicians are not intelligent or skilled enough to provide housing for the people. We have building contractors for that. Politicians are not intelligent or skilled enough to provide medical services for the people. We have doctors and nurses for that. In fact, I can't think of one thing that any politician is intelligent or skilled enough to provide for the people. The only thing a politician is good for is to serve as a good example as a bad example for our children. We can point to them and say, "Look, Bobby, that is a politician. He can't get a real job, so he has to live off the taxpayer dollar." We pretend to respect him just so we don't hurt his feelings. But in the end, he's no better than a welfare recipient who won't try to better his situation. Calling all Americans, get up off your fat, lazy asses and start taking responsibility of your country again. I don't care if you don't agree with all of my political points of view. I don't care if you belong to any particular party or if you don't belong to any party at all. I don't care if you're libertarian, Republican, constitutionalist, or even that lying party of asses. What I really care about is that you get up out of your easy chair, Turn off your idiot box and engage your friends and neighbors. Talk to them about what's happening in their lives. Talk to them about gardening. Talk to them about anything that is important to them. Find out what's going on in their heads. Only by doing this will you get a feel for what the people are really thinking and feeling. Watching talking heads on television spewing forth imaginary statistics that can be manipulated any way that they want is not going to tell you what the people are thinking. It isn't going to help you help your neighbor. How are you supposed to know how a proposed law is going to affect your community if you don't go out there and talk with your community about it? How are you going to know whether or not the elderly widow that lives across the street from you will be able to keep purchasing her medicines under Obamacare unless you ask her? And you can't ask her if you're watching American Idol. You can't ask her if you're playing Zynga games on Facebook. Hell, you can't ask her if you're sitting here listening to me all day long. Forget the federal government for right now. It's broken beyond repair. Let's concentrate on our local and state governments. Let's fix them. By fixing the individual pieces, we will eventually fix the entire system. By fixing our city and county governments, we will fix our state governments. By fixing our state governments, we will fix our federal government. This is a problem that we have to work on from the top down, not from the bottom up. We can't start with the bottom, where the feds are. It won't work. We have to start at the top with the people. Fix ourselves. Fix our local governments. Fix our state governments. Then finally, we will be able to fix the bottom tier, the federal government. If we do this, if we do this, we can whip our federal government back into shape and have it operating correctly again within 3 election cycles. 2, if we work hard and get out of this whole two-party paradigm rut that we're in. I think we should begin by making sure we know where this started. It started with Watertown, Massachusetts. I think we should turn Watertown into a national park. Retain all the citizenry there and put a bubble around it. Then we can have daily reenactments of the events that happen there while spectators watch in awe at how stupid people can be. We can use Watertown as a cautionary tale to tell our children to scare them into rejecting tyranny, much the way we use fairy tales and fables to teach moral values. Yes, this could work. And it would raise a lot of revenue because it would quickly become a favorite destination for freedom-loving citizens. They could even drag their liberal friends there to show them what happens when liberalism is allowed to rule the day. And maybe we can even spin it into a metaphor about safe sex. I'm Robert Rowe. Thank you for listening to the show today. I certainly hope you enjoyed listening as much as I've enjoyed talking. Please remember to visit the sites of the Friends of Awake Radio. Those sites being the Awareness Act Social Network, the Trans-Egoist Daily Journal, and preppingblog.com. Awake Radio can also be found on Facebook, where they censor much of my material, and on the survivalistboards.com. Please be sure to check out the Awake Radio YouTube channel called The Awake Radio. If you have any questions or comments about today's episode or any other episode, feel free to contact me at rrowe@awarenessact.com. That's RROWE at awarenessact.com. If you have any complaints about the show, you can call 1-800-I'm-A-BITCH. That's 1-800-I-AM-A-BICH, and you will be connected to a Watertown operator who will assist you further. And as always, I hope you have a great day.